Well, if I introduce myself as the chair, then I think our first question will be around introducing yourself and your book. But I think I know most of you anyway. I'm Mark Briegal, part-time chair of Panels and full-time commercial lawyer, partner at Aaron & Partners, and I run professional practices. So as most of you are aware, most of my clients are other solicitors, doctors, dentists, anybody in those sorts of professional practices. And as a firm, we are a full commercial law firm. I can say I've been on the management board for a year, and we've just announced our best ever results. So
is there a correlation?
Well, I don't know. Well, there's a question. We need someone doing a PhD in behavioural economics to solve that one. I am taking absolutely any credit I possibly can. So life is good. My wife Claire, who you know, sends her regards, but she has a big board meeting coming up. So we have the panel, and it's all about how to write a book and have a book published. And we have here 4 people, all of whom have done and are doing it. And actually, I myself, going about 15 years, had a book published on. It was called. Managing for Attendance, which was really how to deal with absenteeism. So, which is a really, really big book, and if they turn up late, you just hit them with it. It was the best thing to come out of that. So, as a starting point, I know we start at this end with Kathy and go across. If you'd like to sort of introduce yourself to the group, and also then tell us something about your book, so it's an opportunity to plug the book as well. Or books.
Hello, my name is Kathy Brodie. I'm the better half of the Ian Brodie partnership, and I've written books on early years. So my particular niche is children under the age of 5, their development, and I've written a few books on that subject really.
And edited as well.
I've edited and series edited books as well, and I've got some that have been done by publishers. I've got a range of publishing houses. Because I'm a bit of a tart as far as that goes, and I've also self-published as well, so a bit of everything really.
Okay, thank you. Ian.
Okay, I'm Ian Brodie. I'm obviously the worst half. So I tend to work in marketing, particularly for consultants, coaches, and my main business, I have kind of online training courses and help them with that. And 2013 I wrote this. Just the one. Look, how feeble does that look in comparison? So I wrote this book, Email Persuasion. This one was self-published, and we can talk about how it arose. But that's been on the market and sitting on Amazon and stuff, and since late 2013. And occasionally, since I'm also officially the publishing company of it as well. Occasionally, I get like a special fax through, the equivalent of a fax through from an old-fashioned bookshop somewhere down south or whatever will want one copy sent to them, and I have to do a special one-off order. It costs me more to post it out to them than I actually made a profit. Yeah, collected that. I should. It's you, isn't it? I should.
No old books.
Yeah, no old books. That was it.
Sharon.
Hey, I'm Sharon de Mascia, cognitive business psychologist, and I help organisations get the best out of their people. And this is my book. It's got this really catchy title of Project Psychology, using psychological models and techniques to create a successful project. And there's a little exam at the end. Anybody who can remember that will get a prize. So obviously I'll tell you a little bit more about the book when we get to the relevant questions.
Morning, I'm Cordell Hensley. I don't have a copy of my book. It is with the publishers still, expecting to be released in August or September, depending on which website you look at. I work in the lean continuous improvement space, and my book is called Lean Misconceptions, and it's basically a different view of how we could, and what I think should, be doing lean or using lean within business today.
Okay, good. Thanks for that, everyone. So we've got an idea of the range of books. So as a starting point, maybe let's think about what it was that got you going. Why did you decide to write a book? Well, Sharon?
Well, I think basically it came out of experience in that I found myself acting as change manager for a large organisation and helping them manage a lot of projects, and a lot of them were IT-based projects, and it just struck me how little account was taken of people factors in the way that the projects were managed and delivered. And also it was interesting sort of being on the periphery of it, seeing the impact that it had, because you could see firsthand how different it would have been had people factors been taken into account. So I thought to myself, well, you know, surely I'm convinced this isn't the only organisation that's behaving in this way. Projects have a high failure rate, so I thought I'll write something to try and help people realise that actually, you know, when you're managing large-scale projects, it's not just about your Gantt chart and your critical path analysis. You have to remember this is actually a series of people processes, and if you take those into account, you can make your chances of having a successful project are much higher. So that's basically what started me on the idea of writing a book.
Okay, so it was a case of there's a gap in the market, and it's something you wanted to tell people.
It was, but then by coincidence, I delivered a masterclass for the British Psychological Society on projects and how to manage them successfully. And I think about a couple of months after that, I had an email from Gower Publishers, Jonathan Norman at Gower, and he said to me, I've just seen the masterclass you did. It must have been, it wasn't there, so it must have been on the internet or something. And he said, wondered if you'd be interested in writing a book. So I thought, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Why not? So we sort of talked I met him and we talked about what sort of things that Gower might be looking for, and you know, in terms of their market, because they do a whole project management series. Actually, it's not Gower anymore. I think it's Francis Taylor's latest incarnation. But they have a whole project management series, and they wanted this to be part of it. So we worked together on sort of how my thoughts and ideas on on what needed to be in the book melded with their views in terms of what was missing in the market, and that's how the book came into being.
Well, thank you. Interesting. My own experience was very similar. I was at a conference, had been talking, and a publisher came up to me and said, you know, can you write something on this? And I said no, and they sort of persuaded me over a period of time to do it, and that's how it came about. I mean, so Ian, you know, is yours a different story to that?
Yeah, mine's very different, but involving coincidence as well. Mine, in a way, wasn't deliberate. Obviously, I didn't wake up one morning and find the book under my pillow or anything, but I'd been aware that writing a book might be a good thing to help, you know, promote a business, etc. And back in there, so this was about early-ish 2013. In my own business, I was doing quite a lot of live webinars and stuff like that with various different people. So what would happen was I would hook up with someone who had a reasonable sized audience somewhere in the world, and I would do a webinar for their audience about my stuff, one of the things I did, and then they would do in return a webinar for my audience about the stuff they did. And someone connected with me with a lady who was a kind of book coach, and she did these things which was called writing a bestseller in a weekend, and it was like a course you could go on, and it was like done by webinars. It was over an entire weekend. You locked yourself away in a room and went through all these exercises and kind of emerged with the draft of your book. And so I thought, well, that sounds good. I think some of my audience would be interested in that sort of stuff. And then I thought, but I can't in all honesty recommend a course like that unless I know it works. So I thought, well, I'll do the course. So I stumped up, I probably didn't tell you at the time, stumped up some money, paid a lot of money for the course, it wasn't that much money, locked myself away over a weekend. Do you remember that? We went to the pictures on the Friday, so I was late starting, but then locked myself away for the entire weekend, didn't speak to anyone, and it was run in America, so the time zones were all shifted as well, and did all the exercise and came out at the end of the weekend by really late on Sunday with an initial kind of draft for the book, and it went from there. And the reason I picked email marketing was the webinar I was going to do for her in return was about email marketing, which was one of the topics I kind of talked about and taught people on. But it wasn't like a really strategic pick or anything like that. I hadn't decided this is the one thing I wanted to be known for. I was doing a webinar on email marketing for her, and it seemed a bit logical that if I was going to write a book and then say, hey, I've written a book, it was about the thing that I was going to... Otherwise, it would be a bit weird showing up to her audience and saying, well, I did a course and I wrote a book, but not on this topic, so I just did it on that. I did it on that.
Brilliant. And so obviously you're in a very different sort of non-businessy field, Kathy, so what inspired you?
It is actually quite similar to Sharon's in that by the time I'd come to write my first book, I'd been doing a lot of blogs, I'd been doing a lot of training on observation, assessment and planning, which is something that we have to do as a statutory requirement for early years. So everybody had to do it, so I was doing a lot of training on it. And I had a publisher contact me to say, I've read some of your work online. I think I've been publishing online for about 4 years at that point. Would I be interested in doing a book? Can I come up to Stockport and meet you and we can have a chat about it? So it was kind of like, yeah, let's just see where our interests lie. And out of that came the first book. So it is very similar, those sorts of coincidences and all the planets aligning kind of thing. But I do think that you have to have some kind of background already, or you have to have some sort of credentials before you start on that road. I do know people, especially in universities and colleges, who have written whole books and then gone, I wonder if there's a market for it. And surprisingly, a lot of the time there's not, because nobody's actually approached them and said, is there a market for it?
Okay. That's a useful point. And Cordell?
Nobody approached me. No, to be honest with you, mine came out of frustration, and it was probably years in the making, because I've been working as a consultant in the lean continuous improvement space for like 8-9 years now, and the first 3 or 4 years, I suppose, get my feet under the table in the consulting world, but having spent a lot of time at Toyota and having my own kind of personal views about how things should be, and then going and seeing what's actually going on in the consulting world, I found I was quite frustrated, because I found a lot of consulting companies, organizations, and consultants were effectively trying to take something off the shelf, cookie cutter approach, go into a company and go, here, follow this recipe, and magic will happen at the other end. And I still think there's a lot of companies that are doing that and buying that. And my book was kind of my attempt to say, look, this is wrong. This is not what this is about. We're missing some of the fundamental underlying principles behind this. Here's a different way. Here's my belief or my understanding of how we should be doing it. And then I approached the publisher. And I'm sure we'll get to that, but within about 30 minutes I had a response from them saying, yes, let's do this.
Brilliant. So before we move on, anyone out there got a book at the back of their mind, something they're thinking of going for?
Yes.
What's that, Rob?
It'll be around innovation. But I suppose the question, which is around, how do you differentiate? I mean, let's say anyone can write a book. Go and do it in a weekend.
I didn't finish it in the weekend. I started it in the weekend.
But for me, it has to sort of say something new. So in a way that holds me back to making sure that I've got something that is actually going to resonate in the market. So I wonder what your thoughts are around differentiating or finding a niche or something with your book, or the book needing to speak to a message.
Anyone want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I'll put that up. That's the one question my mum always says every time I say, I'm going to do another book. She goes, haven't you run out of things to write about? It's like, no, because there's always something new. And in terms of finding a niche, you will have a particular perspective on whatever it is that you are writing about, and you will see that through a certain lens. So the very fact that you are writing it will be unique. However you end up writing that, your style will be unique, your take on things will be unique already. So you don't need to find a niche as far as that goes. But I've printed some things off there, but what the publishers will be looking for is what is it that will sell this in terms of a uniqueness. And that is as simple as a Google search or an Amazon search under your title, a few keywords. If you've got thousands of books that are already hitting that market, then maybe you need to rethink your niche a little bit. But if you've only got 1 or 2 books that are already out there, if they're already out of date, the Sustained Shared Thinking book that I did, there's only one other book that deals with that, and that's about 10 years out of date now. So I knew then that was going to be okay, because I was the only one producing that. So if you can find something like that, then you're onto a winner.
Actually, I think that's something we did find with when publishers have been contacting you. Often it was to produce a book. It's almost like they'd gone through the publication dates of previous books on topics. And once we got to 3 years after it had last been published, we need a new one on that. And I mean, certainly I found that date thing applying to my book in terms of sales. Now, maybe because email is regarded as technology, so people would be looking at it going, if it's from 2012, it must be out of date now. even though probably the principles are everlasting. So you do get that, and I can imagine in innovation, people would you could almost write the same book that someone wrote 3 years ago, but everyone would see it as new because it's just written today. Obviously you go through. I was teaching my stuff, and I thought I was doing something different to what everyone else was teaching. So I knew that the book itself would be different. So I didn't necessarily do research to make sure the book was different. I kind of knew it would be because no one else was teaching the exact same. There's always a core that's common, isn't it? Otherwise, you're not going to. Everything in your field isn't different to what you say. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. But there's your special little bit that sits on top, and I'm sure that. I'm sure it would be different.
So just to make sure, to validate that there's an audience there, did you look at publishing in, say, a magazine, an extract or a shorter version of something you want to expand into? How did you gauge the market?
I think, from my own experience on this, that yes, before I did the book, I'd written some articles on similar topics that had been published, and where you've got, sort of your business magazines or whatever your specialist subject is, if they're interested in a short article on the subject, that gives you an idea that there is a market out there for a longer exposition.
For me, I actually I went on and Google searched for not just my title, but anything around that to see if there was anything that was similar. I didn't find anything, and I knew there was a market anyway, because a lot of the discussions that I get involved with online and with fellow consultants work, they don't all revolve around my topic, but there is a lot of activity, a lot of discussions. There are a lot of discussions about how we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it wrong, if that makes sense. And there's various different views and lots of different opinions about it, but there's a lot of discussion about it, and therefore I thought, why not? And I think the point about its uniqueness, they say there's nothing new under the sun. The idea for me is it's about pulling together the work of various different people who have built up the body of knowledge, if you will, of what I do, and I've just kind of put my personal twist or my personal perspective on it to create something new. But they say standing on the shoulders of giants and working on all the work that everyone else has done before. It's not like you're coming up with something that nobody's ever thought of. Maybe you are, but the reality of it is it's most likely that you're going to be building on something that others have done, which is actually quite a big core theme of my book is, build on what other people have done. Don't just copy. Come up with something that works right for you.
I think there's kind of sweet spot, isn't there, in that you don't want someone to have published exactly the same book as you recently, but on the other hand, if no one's ever published a book on that topic at all, it's probably an indication that there's no market there because no one's buying. So if you go onto Amazon and you search more generally, not for the specifics of what your book's about, but when I go onto Amazon, there are quite a few books about email marketing. So I search for those, they're there. And actually you can, I don't know the names of the tools off the top of my head, but the Amazon rank, this is book number 78,000, whatever in the world. There are some tools where you can put that in and they'll give you an estimate of what that turns into in sales per day. And then you can kind of go, all right, so if the current number one book is 50,000th in the world, that means 30 sales a day of the book. That's not bad, actually. That's going to add up over a year. On the other hand, if the first one you find, the top one, is number 85 million in the world, and there's only one selling every week, it's probably going to give you a feeling that there's not a huge market for it.
I think the only caveat we should put on that is, and we have a PhD student here, if you do have a PhD or if you've done a doctorate or if you have done unique individual research and a lot of people do then publish that as part of a book, then that will be unique, because especially for PhD it's got to be brand new work. So but apart from that,
you're not necessarily looking for lots of sales.
No, that's something.
Well, that's a question we'll come back to later as to why actually you're doing this. I think is a really interesting point, because I was thinking about this morning, that I did make some money from the book. Was it worthwhile financially? Probably no. directly in terms of the amount of angst of getting the thing to publish compared to the amount of royalties that came in over the years. It's still out there. It's about 15 years old, and I think last year I, out the blue, got a payment of £4.63 came in from the publisher.
Drinks are on you.
Well, drink was on me, I think, rather than drinks. But, you know, from my viewpoint, it wasn't about the money. You know, there's a certain amount of, it's nice when somewhere on a CV it says published book, and it was about useful for promoting the business at the time, which is what we'll come on to. But I think this is a market that is about positioning. I don't know. Are you looking yours as an income stream, Kathy?
No. I haven't sat down and worked out pounds per hour, but it's going to be pennies per hour. It's not good. Not
Yeah,
good.
it is way below minimum wage, isn't it, really, for...
And it's not just the hours; it's the angst as well.
Yes.
Kathy has a book deadline for the end of the month. It's like,
This month.
we're living through that at home right now. Fantastic.
All of you.
Yes.
Just about surviving.
One of our kids have left home just to avoid it.
Okay, I mean,
But I was going to say, it's maybe worth talking about the economic side of, because if you get a book deal, I mean, I don't know what everybody else's book deal is, but typically the typical royalty thing is about 8 to 10%, something like that. If you negotiate well and you're well known, it varies obviously. If you're like a well-known author and you've sold a lot, you can bump that up with a commercial book deal. But typically, it's hovering around the 8 to 10% range, I think. If you have a publisher doing it, if you're well known, you might get an advance. So you got an advance on your last book, but not on the first two.
No.
And also, if you're first time as an author, you're quite timid as well. So I do know someone on their first deal got a few thousand, but that's because they were really pushy negotiator, not because it was offered. It was, they really pushed it. Mine, so if you think yours are about 20, 30 quid, are they, a book?
Yeah.
So for a big one, so 30 quid, you get 3 quid
Yeah.
a copy, or 2 quid for a 20 quid book.
Less tax.
Less tax and stuff. Mine's self-published. So typically with self-publishing, it depends on the route you go and who prints it for you. And obviously you got the Kindle side. So if you're printing it up, the easiest way is through Amazon Create Space, which is basically Amazon publish it for you. And you can get it designed and all fancy and stuff like that. You do all that and you upload a PDF for them. And they then, when someone buys on Amazon, they basically print, or they keep a small stock and send it to them. So they handle everything. And on that, like on a 10, I think the book was $10, I think I sold it for, priced for the American market. And I think I make $3.70 on a $10 book. So it's between 30 and 40%. And the more expensive it gets, the more margin you make, because their costs are relatively fixed. And then on Kindle, and this is where publishing companies are really cheat you. On Kindle, for books that are less than $2, you make 30%. For books between $2 and $10, you make 70% of the price. And then above $10 again, you make about 30%. But the publishing house still gives you only 10%. So they make a lot more versus the printing cost, but they don't. So the economics are kind of worth looking at. If you are talking to someone about getting a deal, do negotiate. Because we got a much better deal last time than the first time.
Absolutely.
How does the economics go on?
10% for the first, I think it was 2,000 copies. After that, 12%.
It goes up.
So we'll see. That assumes that it's going to sell 2,000. It was 2,000 or 2,500 copies. But yeah, that's the interesting bit, and they've priced the book at the $30, £25 mark,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But that's the retail price, and actually that 10% is not of the retail price.
Right.
It's of the price that the publisher gets from Amazon or whatever bookseller, which means,
They
they're
discount
selling at
discount it.
wholesale.
Yeah,
Let's say,
true.
let's be honest, a $30 book, they're going to be selling to Amazon at most probably 20, 25. Amazon's going to want their little cut of it. But the Kindle bit of it, and it's the same thing, I absolutely agree, you only get that small percent on the Kindle thing, or any e-versions. I've pestered my publisher several times about when the Kindle version's coming out, because it's actually, my book's actually listed on Amazon now, but there's a release date for the book, but there's nothing about Kindle or e-versions. And my publisher's been a little bit, how should I say, incommunicado. Since he got my manuscript, they don't want to know. No, I'm being unkind. But the answer to the question for me in that respect is that I get the feeling that they're going to leave it on physical copy only for a period of time to try and drive the, get the money back from themselves for the cost of printing it. And then when sales kind of dip down, in the second week, they'll do the Kindle version 6 months or a year later. I don't know.
What was your experience, Sharon, with this?
Well, because they asked me to write the book, I guess they were slightly more generous, because I think I got just over 2,000 up front.
Good.
And then I'm just trying to remember the scales. It was something like, it was just over 10% on the original book. And then it went down after, I can't remember, there was after so many copies, it went down 2%. And the Kindle electronic versions, you get very little. But one of the issues, because Gower are more of a sort of an academic publisher, the price for this book when they published it was £75.
Wow.
Worth every
That's
penny.
the way to do it.
Now that obviously, when we come to talking about sort of which you go for, self-published or publisher, and I think it's still 60 something. So, although on the one hand you might argue, well, 10% of that is better, it limits the market because I mean, how many people? You go out and pay 20 quid for a book, would you go out and pay 75?
Yeah, you have to be serious, don't you?
It's an interesting one because on the questionnaire, which I'm sure we'll get to, it talks when you first fill in the form of the publisher, they ask you about potential market, etc., and how much do you think the book is going to sell for? And I put it down as like 5 or 10 or something like that because that's what I was thinking. That's what I would pay for a book. And one of the very first questions from the publisher: why so little?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd rather have 10% of £5 books sold, 1,000 £5 books sold than even 25% of a £100 book that sell too.
That's interesting because my book was more of a training manual, and it went through one of these training, and that was actually at 195 quid.
And in the legal sector, books tend to be expensive.
Yeah, in the legal sector. And but of course it had quite a short shelf life, and then they discounted it, and then it got a bit. There were some quite nice royalties up front because it was a new topic, and we went for it. But it is that how you deal with the publisher, which I think moving on was our next question, which was sort of around working with a publisher. How do you find the right publisher for you, or decide on self-publishing? Is it worth? Let's start with Ian. Pros and cons of self-publishing.
Really, I went down the self-publishing route because that was what the lady who I did the course with did. So I didn't think nobody was coming knocking on my door, asking to publish it for me. Weirdly, after I published it, a Russian publishing firm published a Russian version of it and just gave me some money for that. Which I haven't earned back yet in royalties. How they haven't earned my advance back on that one. But there is a Russian version of my book, all in Russian, with a better cover than mine and stuff like that. It's pretty good. But I've no idea whether it really says the same thing.
Elections.
Maybe they've been using it. Yeah. Oh no.
Email persuasion.
Yeah, maybe that's why they. I should have thought of that. But I really just de facto went down the self-publishing route. But I guess the pros are it does give you a lot of control. So you do make more. So I have actually made a decent amount of money from the book because it's sold reasonably well, and I'm getting £3 odd per copy. And I remember when I was looking at books, I read a report from an American company that surveyed loads and loads of business authors, including some New York Times top 10 bestsellers and stuff. And what they all said was only one of them, I think, had made $100,000 in sales of the book. But every single one of them said they'd probably made the equivalent in terms of other benefits, in terms of getting consulting or whatever. But, in a business book just doesn't sell tons and tons. So I haven't made $100,000, but I've done all right financially. So that's the good thing about self-publishing, really. And a bit of control. You can do what you want. You can get it out really quick. So I did this thing where I wrote it over dictated over a weekend, went away, slept on it for a bit, and then eventually typed that all up and changed it round and did stuff and edited it. So it was out a couple of months later, whereas a commercial publisher just takes forever to come out usually. You hand it to them, it seems to disappear. We'll get. But so that's the pro. Fast, you get more money, but obviously you have to do everything. And absolutely the trickiest bit for self-publishing is like formatting and stuff like that. You don't have an editor, so you have to get it edited somehow. If you're not a great editor yourself, I crowdsourced it a bit. I got people to send out copies to about 50 odd people who came back with corrections and stuff. And then I spent a little bit of time with someone who knew about books to kind of rearrange bits of it, and I had to kind of pay for that. But so that's the thing, and the formatting and things. You used a basic template, whereas again you haven't got them working on it.
So what was your experience, Sharon, of working with a publisher?
Well, I guess you've got the slight frustration if they take you hand the book over and you're all excited and you want to see it on the shelves, and then 6-7 months later. In fact, I think they said it can take up to 12 months from them receiving the manuscript to appearing on the shelves. I think for me it was more like 7 months. I think the advantage of having a publishing house is that they do everything for you, and that once you hand over the manuscript, that's pretty much your work done. They get their marketing arm behind it. They design the covers. They determine the price. They work out where to advertise it. You do have to pay for editing, or at least with Gower you did. So they sent me a bill for the editing. But I think it's interesting because I'm writing another book at the moment, which is called Wellbeing is Not a Bowl of Cherries. And I'm like this about whether I go with a publisher or whether I do it myself, because this book was not written to be a business tool. It was written in terms of sort of, I suppose, training and guidance, really, like Kathy said. But the next book I'd like to use a bit more commercially, because one of the problems you have when you have a book like this is the publisher owns it. So, for example, I can't publish chapters. I can't send chapters to people, to promote the business, because it's actually copyrighted in some way to the publisher. So you're limited in what you can do. Because it's £75 a copy, it's not quite as easy when you go out to meet a potential client to say, oh, I have a copy of my book, Whereas obviously if you self-publish, you've got, as you say, you've got the control, you're in control of the cost. But for me, not being a marketing person like Ian, the disadvantage in doing it myself is I'm thinking, can I really match that sort of marketing and publicity arm that a big publishing house has? And for me, this is the debate. I think there are swings and roundabouts with both.
And your experience with the marketing stuff was the publishing. You've had this. Was it 3 different publishers?
3 or 4, yeah.
But they haven't done a lot.
No, they don't. They reckon they go around to universities and do book fairs and things like that. But I haven't seen much evidence of it. And I think in the modern world, you can do as much marketing yourself. You can get it out there.
So with your latest book, is that with a publisher or are you doing it yourself?
Yes, no, that's with a publisher again, which I'm severely regretting.
Okay, so your next one you might do yourself. I'm just conscious of the time, so maybe we've talked a lot about sort of publishers and how we got there and so on. Should we move on to talk a little bit about the process? If you can give some tips to the aspiring authors out there as to sort of how... some good tips on how to go about actually writing the stuff. Do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I think the best thing about the publisher, as much as I've had a lot of frustrations with them, is the time commitment. Effectively, you sign a contract with them to deliver a manuscript by a certain time. I had been writing and rewriting and coming up with the idea for writing my book for probably 3 or 4 years before I actually got down to business last year and wrote it. And I wrote it as a result of contacting a publisher saying, I'd like to write this book, I've been working on it, blah, blah, blah. And they said, fantastic. And they said, what's your timeline? I said, October. And they go, here's a contract, we want your book by October, kind of thing. Yeah. But it forced me to actually sit down and write it. And I think John Maxwell, in his books, talking about qualities of leadership, he says that public commitment to doing something is an incredibly powerful motivator to actually doing it. And so if you want to write a book, I think the best thing you can do is actually commit to writing it. Do it publicly, do it to your friends, to your family, get a publisher, write a legal contract, force yourself to do it, because otherwise you'll end up like I was for years. Every once in a while I get a bit bored and I thought, I'll pull it out and see what it looks like, spend an hour on it and then forget about it for months.
So you've got the commitment, and it's by October. You've got to get this published in. And what did you do? Set aside some time each week, or?
No, I did. I don't work quite that organised. To be fair, I live in hotels during the week generally, so I work away. So evenings in the hotels, I'd spend an hour or 2 working on it. But some evenings I'd sit and watch films. I did kind of set myself, right, well, here's my outline, this many chapters, I want to have it. I did set myself some milestones, which in the main I achieved. I think I did okay with it. I think one of the big things for me is I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Not from a writing perspective, because I actually enjoy the process of writing. But the more I researched it, the more I looked into it, the more I realized that I didn't really have any clue what I thought. There's so much more out there. And even now, and it's a question for me to the rest of the panelists, every time not every time, but almost on a daily basis, I'm having a conversation with someone and I go, that should have been in my book. I missed a whole chapter.
That's your next book.
etc. Yeah, well, it is.
That's another question. Would you do it again?
Yes.
So what about for you, Sharon? How do you sort of manage your time to produce this for a deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo some of what Cordell said in that I think you do have to be very disciplined. At the time that I wrote this, I had the choice of a 12-month contract or an 18-month contract, and my first inclination was I'll go for the 12-month, get it done. But I didn't. I thought, well, no, actually, you never know what happens in life. I'll give myself a bit of space. I'll go for the 18-month contract. And I was glad I did, because at the time that I started writing this, I changed jobs to a consultancy. And you know what it's like when you're working for a commercial consultancy. I was working away. I was working evenings, sort of writing up assessment centre reports. I was travelling weekends. And for a while, I had this sort of writer's block. And I must admit, I never believed in writer's block. I always thought it was something, something a bit affected. But actually, I found I was so busy that when I had got time to sit down and write the book, I couldn't actually do anything. And what I found was the way I made this work for me is I actually blocked out chunks of time, because I guess to some extent it depends on your own sort of personal approach, but it also depends on the type of book you're writing. If you're writing the sort of book that's literally just from your personal experience and you're just writing it, then I think it's probably easier to do it in little bits and pieces whenever you can. But because the book that I was writing was research-based, evidence-based, you've got a lot of research around that. And I found that unless my mind actually had some degree of freshness about it, I just sort of couldn't set to it. So I think discipline and concentration are important. And I think what you said about deadlines is quite right. You've got to actually put time in your diary to do it, not just wait till you've got a couple of hours spare. But obviously, as I say, it depends on the type of book and how you work best. But for me, that was the way I had to do it. And that is the way I'm having to do it again. I'm having to block in time so I make the time and, more importantly, the headspace to do it.
Okay, so I suppose the question then on this side of the room is, how do you maintain domestic bliss in the Brodie household when you're both writing books?
I'm not even going to those murky waters. But I would absolutely agree with Sharon there. That's exactly what I've done. I've had to block out time. I've had to get other jobs done, sorted, and I've had to say to people, I'm doing nothing in June. Don't even bother asking me to do anything else in June, because it's just not going to happen. If I don't have this month to get this finished, it is not going to get finished and I'm going to be in trouble. But especially when you're reading papers, and every single day I'm reading stuff and I'm like, oh shit, that really should have gone in there. And every single, and that will be forever, I am sure, sadly.
Has having our youngest son every day remind you of how many words you have to do per day? Has that helped or hindered?
That has mainly hindered.
Okay. So I wouldn't recommend telling the child how many words you've got to do a day and then having him work it out, and as you've done less and less, that number going up.
Yeah, no, it's not a good method.
I end up dictating it, which might help if you're of that. Not as a book. I dictated as questions and answers, so I ended up. You kind of, how you write this is what it's going to be about. You almost like write the back cover. The back cover, the fancy stuff about what's in there and what you'll learn from it and stuff like that. You kind of write that first, and then you go back and say, well, okay, what are the chapter headings? And for each chapter heading, I wrote like a dozen questions that someone would want to know about in that area, and then I just dictated the answers. So I kind of read the question out. How do I get started with an email system? First thing you got to do is. And then I got that transcribed, so you pay, $1 a minute or whatever. Turns out most people speak at 10,000 words an hour. So if you want to, 3 hours of talk like that is 30,000 words. 5 hours, 50,000 words, good book. And then you get it back and you go, oh my God, this is crap. It's me just chatting. But then you've got something to go on. And I think sometimes, whether or not you're transcribing, sometimes just getting going is really important. Yeah. We have a friend who wrote a book, which was Financial Times one, a few years ago, and he had 18 months, and I remember being on Skype with him 17 months in, and he had nothing, just nothing. And he got an extension for another month, but he wrote it all in the last 18-hour days for the last few weeks. It was madness. And the main problem was he hadn't done a first draft. He ended up getting a book coach and stuff like that to walk it, and the guy just said, just write a chapter. And then the guy would say, this chapter's crap, let's review it. But if he hadn't written the crap chapter, he wouldn't have been able to improve it to get the good chapter.
So as my experience was exactly that. So you start off, I got sort of conned into writing this book. They go, yeah, would you write a book on this? No. Well, if you didn't write it, what sort of things would you want to see? You go, well, this is the, yeah. With hindsight, it's obvious, isn't it? But at the time, I was young and naive.
You felt
I felt. But you start off, you go, well, okay, these are the sorts of things you can go into it, and you come up with a draft and chapters. And what I did that I think worked for me is I wrote sort of chapter 11. It was chapter 11 first, because that actually to me was the really easy one. So I got that down. Okay, there's a chapter done. I've got something. Looks okay. Send it off to them for review. They came back, yeah, we like that, tweak that. I've now got a format. What's the next easy one to do? And you do that, and then as it got closer, there was an element of, right, I've got to get this chapter finished this week. And it became a real pain, because there were a couple of chapters that was on the edge of my comfort zone, or I wasn't interested in, and I just had to sit down and force myself to do them.
Chapter 1, I believe, is always the hardest. The introduction where you cover the whole thing. Don't write that first.
No.
Right, as you said, dive into something where you've got it all in your brain, and you go, oh yeah, I'd love it, and then you've got something and you go in. I think there's a quote. It's not Hemingway. Nobody really said it, but they say Hemingway said it, which was "Write drunk, edit sober," and because you've just got to get into the flow. And get going with it, and never mind whether it's grammatically correct or whatever, and then go back, because there is this thing, you'll know, Rob, from creativity, about being in flow and doing stuff. And if you're forever editing all the time, you're knocking yourself out of flow, and you're switching your brain to edit analytical mode when it should be in creative mode. Is that could be complete nonsense, but does that make sense?
Maybe what we should do is switch off the spell check. While we actually
Yeah.
I'll try that next time.
Somebody said to me yesterday, the trouble with lawyers is we read with a pen. Okay, let's then move on, because it's now sort of 10 to, so I want to wrap this up by 9. So in terms of sort of benefits that you've got, or I don't know, Cordell, but you're hoping to get from having done this. So looking at the business, we've said that you're not, unless you're J.K. Rowling, you're not going to retire onto an island on the profits of writing these books. Sadly. So buy more copies, please. But so what benefits have you got from doing the books? Start with Kathy.
I guess for me, it was for observation, assessment and planning for the first book, I was able to go out and do courses and say, I've literally written the book on this, and that was a really nice feeling, and that obviously brought in a lot of business, so the actual pay came from doing more courses, doing conferences, doing talks about that subject area. The second book was the book that I really wanted to write, was the Sustained Shared Thinking, and that was almost like a vanity project in that I wanted to do that. I knew there was a niche market for it, and as a book it's done quite well, which I kind of knew that it would do, so that was financially good for me. I think it does give you credibility. I think if you can say that you're an author, and I love meeting authors, I think it's really good, so I can appreciate that. But it is those non-tangibles, I suppose, that you do get more training, you get more conferences, and you get your name out there as well, so you can go along and say, this is who I am, and they go, oh yeah, I know. And in fact, I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and somebody came up and introduced himself and said, your book's on my shelf the whole time, I use it all the time, and you just don't know that's going on, so that's a really nice feeling as well.
I guess because so my book was okay financially. In terms of side benefits, because of the kind of field I'm in, which is marketing, and because lots of people do stuff with other people, it does bring up opportunities. So the book sold reasonably well, which meant it was top of the Amazon chart. If you search for email marketing, it was top of it in Amazon in the UK, US for about 2 years. So what it meant was, if anyone wanted to write an article and quote someone, or anyone wanted to interview anyone about email marketing, they would, largely it was me, they would do. Because they just go onto Amazon to type email marketing, oh, him. And then so I'd get an email, oh, can we, and I still today, like yesterday, I got we're writing a blog post on email marketing, or can we interview you for this, that, and the other. So you do get quite a lot of that. If you're in a field where that kind of thing happens, I mean, that doesn't happen so much in your field, does it, in terms of request? But it is literally every week I'll get a request for someone for an interview or a quote or stuff like that. The problem is, I guess, and this is, be careful what you wish for, because going right back to the start, because I just picked the topic randomly, it wasn't necessarily the topic I wanted to be famous for. So getting all these requests coming out, oh, can we not talk about something else? Because it's not the main part of my business. So I've ended up with a good number of people who know me through the book. And I'll get requests from people who are run little shops. Can you come and write some emails for us for our shop? I say, no, I can't. It's not what I do with the slightest. So you kind of do make sure when you're writing the book, it's the first one I think should always be the very ideally the core of what you're doing. Maybe it's your second one is the core, like yours is the core of what you do, so that when people do come in and that publicity works for you, it's actually in the right areas.
Sharon?
Well, I think there have been a couple of interesting spin-offs. I think the two things that have happened is firstly, I get invited to speak quite a bit at conferences. Secondly, I get invited to write a lot, so I've published quite a lot of articles for different journals on the back of this. Another really interesting thing that happened is one bank holiday, I was busy catching up as you do on bank holidays, and I got this phone call that said, oh, hello, I'm from Iceland. And I was a bit shirty because I thought, oh no, they're trying to sell me something on a bank holiday. But it was actually the professor from the University of Reykjavik. And my book is actually a textbook for the Masters in Project Management at the University of Reykjavik. So the nice thing is I get invited out there every year, and again this year. So I go out for 2 days and teach leadership psychology on the Masters in Project Management there. So that was quite nice.
You get to go to Iceland. Brilliant. Oh, that's good. And so nothing yet, but what are you hoping for?
I think to a certain extent, even though it hasn't come out yet, yesterday afternoon I was in a training program, and as you do, you put your little plug in. Oh, I've got a book coming out, and you do. You can tell the response from people instantly changes, generally in a bit of a positive way. For me, benefits even at this stage is a bit of pride, a bit of self-confidence that you gain from having done that. A bit of a joke. My father's a PhD, and he's been published in other people's books and some of his work, but he's never actually written a book, and so a bit of a joke. And my book is due out right about the time he's coming to visit this summer. So to hand him a copy and say, by the way, I beat you to it. Having said that, my 10-year-old's book comes out this month.
On?
No, she did a 100-word story that's included in a bunch of other children's stories, but published.
I think the prestige is still there, isn't it? I hear a lot of cynicism because I hang around with people who marketing and stuff like, oh yeah, anybody can write a book these days, anybody can get it published. But I think for the general public, being an author is still a kind of prestigious thing, and even just writing a bleeding book is hard work.
Oh, it is. And I think we're all in the sort of the consulting field. It's about the credibility that people, what I say. This is why I do a lot of articles. In fact, one of the things I've got to do today is to be interviewed by a legal magazine, because I'm very good at, with the marketing side of saying, I'm Rent-A-Got, want to comment. I will comment on it, because then when people are looking to instruct somebody, oh yeah, I've seen him quoted about this, he might know what he's talking about, is really what it's about. So maybe a couple of sort of quick fire ones to conclude. What would you do differently?
I'd put a bit more forethought, a bit more research into it before I actually committed to a date of how long it's going to take. I think, and I think as well, what you're actually trying to achieve. One of the things I struggled with throughout the writing process was who's it for? Who's the audience? And therefore, what's the key message that I want to hit? Because I did, some would still argue, even in the finished copy, it flits around between other consultants, heads of businesses, the general, operations community, etc. The audience could change throughout the book depending on how closely you read it. So for me, it's that research and really knowing what it is you're trying to achieve with the book, not necessarily for your company or for the the after effects, but what do you want that book to actually do or say, or people to take away from it.
Brilliant. Okay, Sharon.
I think for me it's more about, for the next book, wanting to have something that's more commercial, not in terms of the book, in terms of what I can do with it. I think I want a little more flexibility than a sort of a mainstream publisher.
Okay, that's great. Ian?
I guess echoing both those comments, I mean, for me it would be think more about the topic you want to cover, because if that's the thing you're going to become known for, you might as well be the thing you really want to be known for, rather than the thing you just randomly decided one day to be known for.
We started with Kathy, so maybe we finish with Kathy. So the one thing you do differently, or piece of advice for budding authors?
Blimey, it's quite a big one, that, isn't it? I'm guessing that it's going to be, find a plan and stick to it. However it works for you, and I've heard people do it in different ways. Whatever it is that does it for you for writing, enjoy it and stick with that.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll open it up for questions. It's interesting, having had my book published 15 years ago, the one thing I swore was I was never, ever, ever going to write a book again. And actually, listening to this, I'm sort of going, actually, How to Manage a Law Firm would make quite a nice little book, and I've got some of the chapters. So, I'm sort of slightly inspired. I hope you are. I'd like to thank our panel for their sharing their great views. Their books are available still. And any questions?
Question about marketing the book. So maybe it's obvious that the publisher will go and do that, whatever it is they do. I don't know what they do. There's self-publishing. There's people building websites around the book. Any thoughts around what would be effective?
Yeah, it's whatever your audience currently is. Mainly, I mean, that's what the publishers will ask. I think we've got some forms here and stuff. The publishers, when they're asking about the book, the main questions they're asking are, how many people do you have on an email list? How many people follow you on social media? All that kind of stuff. Because they want to know, do you have a pre-established audience? Do you go out and do talks all the time? Because again, that's a potential audience. So in my case, the marketing was really to my existing email subscribers who get emails from me on a regular basis. Firstly, warming them up by asking if anyone wanted to kind of get an early copy to look at and give me feedback, and then taking that feedback into account and then kind of launching it. And when asked for feedback, some of it was, spelling mistakes, and some of it was like a testimonial. So I just sent them the testimonials back and said, hey, please bang it on Amazon now that it's gone live. You can play around with things like on Amazon, especially Kindle, you can give it away free for up to 5 days in any quarter. I wouldn't recommend keep giving it away for free forever, but it can generate some buzz. So I think mine was like the #1 business book in the UK that was being given away for free for the period it was given away for one of the days. It was like up there with some dodgy fiction books and stuff. But obviously I made no money from that, but it got some buzz, and it meant it got the book into the hands of people who, it was like, I think it was about 5,000 people over the first weekend got it for free. Which actually, given that your goal is really to become more well known and stuff, that might be a good thing. So there's some things you can play around with. These days, I don't think the publishers do massive amounts. I mean, yours just introduced you to people you could write articles for.
Yeah, great. Yeah, here's a list of people going write articles free for their magazines. Yeah, because I've got time to do that. It's like, and that's their idea of marketing. But they do put out flyers. They go to book fairs, all that sort of thing. But it depends on where your niche is going to be as to how to get it out there. I do think the internet's a very powerful thing. We did build a website around observation, assessment, and planning. I don't think it was as successful as it could have been. But it's just getting the word out there, getting it into the hands of magazines that might promote it, getting it into the hands of people that might promote it, that might take it round to conferences with them as well.
Yeah, I think it probably comes down to being strategic, doesn't it? Because if going back to what everyone's been saying, the main reason wasn't to make money. So in some ways you might even think, let's not bother trying to promote it to sell loads of copies. What do I really want to do with it? I want people to hire me. So why don't I get a copy printed and post it to my top 10 potential clients, and and with a handwritten inscription and whatever it might be. Thought you might find this useful, because that's probably going to do you more good than 100,000 copies sold. So do that, and I do know some people who've done that quite successfully with their books and things, where they've just used it. I mean, we got you did one. This one is self-published. It's a transcript of Kathy's summit she did recently. So it's loads of different people being interviewed by Kathy, and we put it on Amazon, so you pay £22 £8 if you want to buy it on Amazon. But we got a publisher in the UK to do this version, which turned out to be really nice, and it costs about £3.50 per copy for 300 pages essentially. So you can get, if you get, it's £3.50 for a copy as a really great marketing tool for a high value client. Guys who hire you, it's for a significant amount of money. It's worth paying £3.50 to get some attention from them, I think. So I'd probably go down that route.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, I don't know for you guys, when you get publishing house, my publisher seemed like he was being quite generous when he said you could have 15 free copies. And I thought, geez, I've written this thing, and 15 free, and after that I get a 25% discount.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I have to pay 20 some pounds for my own book. So like it's not something you could just go and hand out. So that's a bit frustrating.
Yeah, actually, we found that we could buy copies of Kathy's book cheaper on Amazon than she was getting as a publisher discount as the author, which was weird. So again, we haven't, with the other ones, we haven't done much with that. So that is one of the advantages of self-publishing, or maybe you can negotiate that. If you're negotiating your deal, get a lot of free copies, because it's nothing for them. That's probably something they're willing to give on. But it would be really valuable to you to be able to send out to potential clients.
Can I just say one thing on contract, which I meant to bring up? If you do go down the publishing route and you sign a contract, the one piece of advice that I was given that I've passed on to everybody is when you go through the contract, there will be a clause in there which is it's a lock-in clause basically that says if you want to write anything else at all, you have to pass it past that publisher before it gets published, and that includes electronic. So if you're doing a blog, you would have to pass that in front of a publisher, and they have 6 months in which to come back to you to say whether they want to use that or not, which is why I ended up with several publishing houses, because I just struck that through, and I was told before I signed the contract, strike that through, go back to them and says you don't want clause 17 in there because you will be writing blogs, and if you do that and you don't strike that through, then you're breaching your contract. So make sure you read the contract and get that struck through, and just say I'm not signing it unless that's struck off. And there's 3 different publishing houses, every single one I've done that, I've just come back immediately and said yeah, that's fine, but it's something they sneak in there, so just make sure that that's struck out.
Bloody lawyers.
Snakes in the grass.
Right, it's after 9 o'clock. As I'm sure some will be hanging around and drinking coffee, but let's wrap that up. But thank you.
Thank you.
Difficult panel.